Hey, hello, hi. We're back. I am going to put into the description all of my sources that I used when I was researching this particular topic. I'm going to be covering a sort of nebulous concept, the concept of identity, but specifically the European identity, and how, honestly, it's just not really a thing that can be properly, concretely defined. And I'll tell you why in just a sec. So buckle in. There are many challenges present when trying to tie the idea of Europe to a European identity, primarily because the concept of a European identity is, at best, a bit fuzzy. Identity, according to Kathleen Kantner, tends to be a catch-all phrase for the presumably needed thick moral underpinnings of social and political order. Now, in this instance, a thick moral underpinning is defined as a hard economic policy or baseline humanity protection policy. However, the concept of a collective European identity has been debated, defined, redefined, and partitioned to accommodate ethnic, historical, and national differences to such a large degree that it seems to have lost all clear-cut analytical contours. This video is not the place to find a definition for European identity, like I said before. Instead, I'm wanting to discuss several distinct yet interrelated concepts. I'm going to be covering general ideas of identity as an external influence versus an internal influence, the factors that play a role in the creation of a cultural identity, the intrinsic politics of adopting a European identity, whether an essentialist identity might be plausible at all in a European setting, and I'm going to wrap up with some of the ramifications of the lack of a cohesive European identity with regards to the European Union specifically. Yes, as you can tell by my voice, I am American, but my focus of study is European history, so this subject just kind of tickles my brain in a really pleasing way. So it's difficult to pin down exactly what a European identity would be, as each political, social, economic, or cultural field has the potential to narrow or widen to suit any given definition. Ultimately, the concept of identity is so ill-defined that it can be likened to a vague hand gesture in the direction of a given problem. Who exactly is to be trusted with defining identity? If the definer is an outside source, they would be decidedly human, and therefore are they not also susceptible to error or bias? Why would we trust them to be immune to the peculiarities of personal interpretation? Alternatively, if identity is not defined by a single source, it is instead the willingness of expression as held by the people who lay claim to it. It can be argued that the latter is more faithful to our current reality, with the former attempting to define identity through the adoption of specific symbols, such as the use of the EU flag on car license plates across multiple countries, the development and adoption of us versus them language in official signage, like in international airports, where in customs there is a location for EU nationals and then another category of others, so everyone else. These are all designed to bombard the individual with the idea of Europeanness. Of course, the hope is that extended exposure will result in a people choosing to internalize the identity provided to them. It is the second concept of identity which can only be adopted at the personal level and thus contribute to a larger level, vice the pre-requirement of a larger level existing prior to the individual adoption, that will continue to operate under for the rest of this video. According to Luisa Passerini, I apologize if I said her name wrong, in The Idea of Europe, we have, in a descending order of importance, identities based on gender and generation, then class and religion, followed by professional, civic, and ethnic identities, which provide a plethora of options to which an individual may subscribe. National identities tend to be political first and then cultural second, both of which will transcend other loyalties, acting as like a bowl into which all other identities are cradled. The multiple identity concept is, however, limited by, quote, the quality of tolerance and to expressing possibilities, end quote, allowing it to be a malleable and ultimately inconcrete concept. In the same vein of individualistic identification, Eurocentric attitudes have been, by and large, increasingly rejected by the members who fall into the category of other. Oftentimes interchangeable with the term victim in academic work, when considering that, quote, what characterized the experience of the European is also the experience of its victims, end quote. The victims ultimately become the people who, in the process of assimilation, were frequently made privileged and given recompense, making the victim title feel unfitting in the end, creating a kind of cognitive dissonance that further muddies identification attempts at the individual and at the public level. Ultimately, the victim, the other, was made part of the dominant culture, therefore situating the other as nested within the European self, despite the incompatibility of the two terms. This still leaves the unanswered question, what is the European self? Is it a personal alignment, or is it a political stance? Can these be separated when developing policies, or is that even advisable at all? The European identity, when adopted by an individual, seems inevitably political, for, quote, collective identities emerge not out of thin air, but rather in broad public debates about deep conflicts over value-laden policy issues, end quote. In the first decade of the 2000s, approximately 10% of the EU citizens who actually responded to a survey ranked their European identity as having higher importance to them than their national identity, which was likely a deliberate political identification within Europe at the time. Due to the expansive nature of the EU, Brexit notwithstanding, the individual identification of European is, with regard to widespread policy, fundamental to their political projects. The policies developed at the national level, if the nation is a member of the EU, will both have to conform to EU standards such as humanitarian requirements, as well as take into consideration the impact the policy may have on the EU as a whole. Examples of that would be like trade policies, humanitarian and social policies, or lower-level economic policies. In recent years, there has been an increase in cross-national allegiance terms based on socioeconomic statuses, such as journalists, public workers, or farmers, or of political categories, right versus left, at the individual level. As Jonathan White states, quote, issue-specific concerns and relations of adversarialism seem as plausible a basis for cross-national allegiances as the widely inclusive ties of European identity, and are arguably more consistent with political pluralism, end quote. This implies that the European identity will likely be consistently weaker than alignments associated with specific issues in lower-level policy development. Therefore, the application of the European identity to a political project would have to implicitly be a pan or supra or at least cross-nationally impactful project. How could individuals within Europe be swayed to adopt the European identity outside of the world of politics and policymaking? Could an essentialist definition be developed in order to provide a baseline for the European identity? So, essentialism is the idea that specific characteristics can be associated with a particular idea of a particular thing. So, for a very simple example, take a cup. A cup must be solid, it must have a space for a kind of liquid, and it must be made of some kind of material that is unlikely to dissolve or deteriorate when introduced to said liquid. Europe as an idea is just way too complex to boil down to a single short list of characteristics that must be shared. Each nation that falls within the European continent holds the potential to be identified utilizing the concept of essentialism, though a shared essentialist definition of Europe would be extremely challenging due to the plethora of microcultures that exist within all nations, states, and even cities. If an essentialist definition of Europe was to be asserted, many nations would naturally be excluded, especially if the asserted characteristics aligned with the traditionally Western European ideals. However, if the essentialist European identity could be made broad and remain flexible, perhaps it's not impossible, but then we're back to the potential for oversimplification or inconsistency, which doesn't really help us when we're trying to come up with a concrete definition. Ultimately, it seems that the European identity is destined to be a politically driven concept. Otherwise, what is the appeal of a shared identity? Camaraderie and a sense of belonging is enjoyable and exploitable on the individual level, but it's immeasurably more valuable on the national and supranational level, as a shared European identity acts as leverage for policymakers at that level. The desire to help one's neighbor is heightened by a shared identity. A loyalty can be forged within the lower levels of the population to the upper echelons of government. So what are the ramifications of a weak European identity? The United Kingdom's withdrawal from the European Union, which is the first formal withdrawal of a country from the EU, can be tied to a lack of a sense of loyalty to the European identity. It's no surprise, then, that this lack of buy-in to the European identity within the UK is very plausibly at least a large contributor that caused the hesitation in joining the community prior to 1975, as well as the popularity of leaving only 45 years after ratification in early 2020. Quote, "In Britain, there's never been sympathy for or even a comprehension of the political and indeed moral purpose of the project to pursue an ever greater union of the peoples of Europe," end quote. Had the European identity been stronger or even existed at least at an impactful level in the United Kingdom, perhaps they might not have withdrawn at all. It's no wonder that the EU continues their attempts to encourage their citizens to adopt a European identity, whatever that ends up meaning. Now, I do want to throw a little disclaimer here. I know Brexit is still a very recent and very touchy topic. It's extremely complex, and I'm not going to delve into it any further than I already have. Maybe in the future I'll do something on it, but in terms of leveraging a shared identity to encourage unity, it was and is pretty clear that the UK did not have enough buy-in at the time of the vote. Ultimately, and unfortunately, the concept of a European identity, or of any identity at all, is clear as mud. It is apparent that a European identity has been a project of the European Union for many years, though it is equally apparent that an identity must be adopted and ultimately defined by the individual claiming it. While the influencing factors of what constitutes an identity are external and can be subject to the propagandizing of organizations, they are still ultimately internal. The European identity, as it stands today, is plainly a byproduct of supranational policy development and thus is inherently political, making the extraction of the identity from political projects nearly impossible when transcending the localized community level. An attempt to divorce the European identity from the political implications is an ongoing project, though boiling down such a variety of inputs into an essentialist identity can, has, and will continue to prove challenging. Until the European identity is more broadly accepted and individual loyalty is achieved to the idea of Europe as a union or a single unit, the European identity will remain weak, ranked low, if at all, within an individual's organization of their own personal multiple identity descriptors. That was a really hard sentence. Understanding identity is like trying to catch a cloud and pin it down. One might be able to recreate the cloud in a container, but is it really the same cloud? Will it ever be controllable at a large scale? Until identity is truly understood, the European identity will remain in a Schrodinger's cat kind of position, existent yet non-existent at the same time. What do you think? Thank you for joining me on this video. I know it wasn't quite as exciting as Marie Antoinette, but it's an interesting concept, and ultimately I understand that it kind of boils down to like, we don't know, because we don't, but the only way that we can develop any kind of anything is to have a discussion. So I really encourage you to continue the discussion in the comments below. Let me know if you like this kind of video. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and I hope I will see you all in the next one. Bye.